Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of December. Today we have some updates, so let's start. We can say that the front lines are stable, but there are very heavy clashes all over the front lines. If we take a look at Liman-Kupiansk front line, you're going to see that there are a lot of icons on the south on Liman front line and on the north on the Kupiansk front line. The Ukrainians made few attempts of counteroffensive operation, but all their attacks were repulsed. But if we're talking today about today, and if we compare today's clashes with the clashes we saw before, I must say that something changed, and let's discuss this in more details using the Western Sources map. First of all, the main direction and the main attack the Ukrainians made on the south in Liman front line and from the town by the name of Terny, from this area, from this bridgehead, the Ukrainians tried to develop their offensive operation in direction of Kremenaya and in direction of Plashanka. This one. So the Ukrainians were attacking first. They reached somewhere in the middle part, and after that, the first wave moved to the north, and the second wave were planning to move to the south. So they were attacking this direction. Furthermore, if we're talking about the south, about this forest, the Ukrainian commandos who located here on the north from Serebryanka and on the northeast from Yampol were trying to attack the Russians through the forest in direction of Dubrova and in direction of Kremenaya. For these purposes, the Ukrainians used around five commandos groups, and furthermore, all those attacks were repulsed. Furthermore, if we are talking about the north part, there is a town by the name of Stelmakhovka. There is another Ukrainian position where the Ukrainians were planning and were trying to accumulate a lot of forces. But the Russians attacked this area with artillery and with rockets, and they deal a lot of damage to the Ukrainians, and they couldn't move the reserves to help the Ukrainians on the south or to help the Ukrainians on the north. Because if we're talking about the north, the Russians attack the area between Kotlarovka, Kislovka, in this area with artillery and rockets as well. So both these two areas were under Russian active fire, and those attacks stopped the Ukrainians or not allowed the Ukrainians to create some kind of attack fist and to attack the Ukrainians or the Russians or the Svatovo from the north. So as you can see, the Ukrainians tried to synchronize these two front lines, and they were planning during the day to attack in both directions. They were trying to attack from the south, from Terny in direction of Plashanka, Kremenaya, from the south through the forest using commandos in direction of Dubrova and Kremenaya. From the south, the Ukrainians were planning to attack in direction of Kuzyumovka, Novoselovskaya. But all those attacks were repulsed, and as a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 160 soldiers and something around 11 armored vehicles. If you take a look at the Russian sources map, you see that first the Russians on the north attacked Stelmakhovka, Novoselovka, and the area near Tabaevka. This is the frontline areas where the Ukrainians have almost completed the mission with accumulation some forces that they were planning to use in direction of Kuzyumovka. After that, the Russians attacked the area near Sinkova. This is the place where the Ukrainians were were keeping some reserves. So as soon as the first waves start offensive operation, the second wave should start their movement in direction of the first wave. But all those plans were ruined by the Russians. The same situation in the south. The Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Plashanka, Kremenaya, but the Russians attacked the Ukrainians on the march, on the fields, and the Ukrainians haven't even reached the position they were planning to reach, and they lost a lot of soldiers, as you can see. If we're talking about Belogorovka, Bakhmut front line, about this area, there are no changes. Just the regular artillery duels, sniper duels, and nothing more. If we're talking about Bakhmut, as you can see, there are no icons, no changes as well. The only thing we can discuss that the Russian sources map has been updated. As you can see now, they're showing the green line that moves along the eastern streets of Bakhmut. You see, I believe that tomorrow this area will be colored in red, and as you can see, So they're showing that the Bakhmut is already in the town. Today we heard a lot of some information from the head of PMC, Wagner PMC, and he said that maybe the Wagners have already got control over Oputne, over entire south part of Bakhmutne, but he told that his soldiers need a few days before they will confirm this information, because he said that he doesn't want to announce about this victory, because maybe the Ukrainians are able to return control over this block during the next upcoming offensive operation that Ukrainians are planning to have, of course. So that's why he's not saying anything. But maybe if Wagners are able to hold this position during the day or two, I believe that maybe by Friday or by Saturday we're going to see another update on this map, and that the Russians will take control over the south part of Oputne. If we're talking about Klishchevka, about this line between Donetsk and Bakhmut, there are no changes. There are very heavy clashes along the front line between parties. The Ukrainians have moved a lot of fresh forces on the front line, so of course it gave them a lot of time of freezed front line, because now the Russians need to reduce to more Ukrainian fresh forces before they will be able to do some movements on the front line. But the situation is as this. If we're talking about Donetsk, today we got the most important update from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. They reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of very heavy clashes near Donetsk, near Vodyane, the Russians managed to establish control over the majority of the territory of Vodyane. So according to this map, we see that just half of this town is under Russian control, but the Ministry of Defense reported that the Russians control more than 50%. So I believe that the Russians have bridgehead on the north part of these small lakes or water reservoirs. So they are on that side of these lakes, and I believe that these days the Russians are planning to complete the clearing operation of the north part of Vodyane, and after that they will be able to establish safe roads and safe connection with Vodyane, with Donetsk, with the rest for areas in this on this bridgehead. And after that, as you can see, the Russians will have operational square on the north, and they will be able to start development of their offensive operation in direction of Severna and Tonika. This is two towns that Ukrainians are using. These are two towns that Ukrainians are using to attack with artillery Donetsk. As you can see, Donetsk is not under very heavy fire as it used to be the day before yesterday. But anyway, I believe that soon the Ukrainians will continue doing their job, and they will continue shelling Donetsk, Gorlovka, Sinovata, all these towns. If we are talking about Marinka, there are very heavy clashes, and you need to understand that both sides have losses. They have a lot of losses, and from Russian side, from Ukrainian side. It's very difficult to compare and to tell who has less losses or who has more losses on this front line. Anyway, the Russians push us, and they promise to take control over Marinka by the end of this year. The question is what price they're going to pay for this, but anyway, this is important mission, and they need to do this, because as soon as Marinka falls, we understand that a lot of towns in the south from Mariivka can automatically be collapsed, and Ukrainians will be forced to step back from these positions. If we're talking about area between Vuhledar and Vremivka tactical bridgehead, these days there were these previous 24 hours, there were a lot of clashes in this area as well. The Ukrainians made few attempts of attack in direction of Novomayorsk, Shevchenko, Pavlovka, Yevgorovka. But those attacks were repulsed by the Russians, and furthermore, the Russians did the same thing as they did on Kupin's front line. As soon as they managed to destroy the Ukrainian attack fist on the ground, the Russians turned their focus on the Ukrainian reserves that were moving from Novoukrainka, Prichistovka, like to help the Ukrainians who were attacking Novomayorsk, Pavlovka line, and the Russians destroyed the Ukrainian reserves as well. And as a result of these clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. As you can see, the Russians have a little bit changed their tactic of the fightings on the front lines. If the Ukrainians attacks, I believe that now the Russians are able to do this because of during the previous months they sent a lot of satellites, and now they have a lot of eyes upon Ukraine. They know everything that happens all over the front line. So the Russians have changed their tactic, and the main thing that first they try to reduce the Ukrainian soldiers, the Ukrainian forces who is on the battle line, and after that they start attacking the Ukrainian reserves, because I believe they are able to see them, and and with this, of course, they managed to increase the losses among the Ukrainians and so on. Furthermore, if we're talking about the south, about Kherson, Zaporozhye area, there are no changes on the ground, but during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians used their drones, Shahed or Gerain drones, that we haven't heard updates about, any news about these drones for many days, for many weeks, I believe, even for months. But starting this week, the Russians started using these drones. They attacked the south of Ukraine. Furthermore, there was attack in Kiev, so I believe that maybe they managed to produce enough of these drones, and I believe that by the end of this year they will use these drones, I don't know, massively, trying to attack the Ukrainians' energy facility, their forces and so on, just to press and to increase the pressure on Ukraine. Furthermore, if we're talking about Belarus, more and more updates are coming from the border between Belarus and Ukraine. The Belarusians started another trainings in this area, another movements of forces on the roads of Belarus. A lot of armored vehicles, tanks, a lot of infantry were moving along the border. And to tell the truth, it's very difficult to understand whether the Belarusians are planning to start with the Russians attack in direction of Ukraine, or this is some kind of a trick, tactical movement just to force the Ukrainians to keep some reserves on the border between Belarus and Ukraine. And if we're talking about this fact, yes, it's true, the Ukrainians were forced to have some forces on the border, those forces that they could use on the front line, but at this very moment they need to keep them there. And if we're talking about the border between Belarus and Ukraine, the number of forces is not like 5 or 10,000. There are around 50-80,000 soldiers all over the border between Belarus and Ukraine. It's some kind of mix with the forces from Russia and forces from Belarus. So if there are around 50,000 soldiers, that means that Ukrainians at least need to have something around 20-30,000 on the south, on the north of Ukrainian border, just to be on the safe side. Because if we're talking about defense state, we need to understand that they are freeze to some certain ground. They can't. They are not flexible. They need to be at a certain location. But if we're talking about the forces who attacks, they can do some maneuvers all along the border. They can move from the Brest to the Homel and to Moser, and they can be flexible, and they can attack from every single side, and they're able to accumulate all their army at some certain point. So this is very important, and in this case the Ukrainians, so this situation works in Belarusian army favor, so something like this. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.